Alright, before we get to Froslass, I just want to make a quick announcement. I've noticed a lot of you want Infernape, and since Infernape is on the longer side in terms of length, instead of rushing it, we'll probably work on it right now and then release it sometime in January. So yeah, don't worry, we are listening though. So thank you. Alright, let's get into the video. What's up, guys? Rounding out our month of December, we have Froslass. The kimono-clad ghost-type counterpart to Glalie, this female-only Pokemon could truly be considered an Ice Queen. And as far as memories of Froslass go, some may remember it infuriating them as they fought to obtain Candace's gym badge in Pokemon Platinum. Froslass's delicate, wispy appearance doesn't say anything about its competitive value though. So let's get into it. How good was Froslass actually? And in this video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. Froslass is a thoroughly mediocre Pokemon. It's frail, it's weak, it has a nearly useless defensive typing, whose weakness to common attacks plowing through its low defenses is made even worse by Stealth Rock. Its only solid stat is really its speed, and it seems to be pretty useless outside of trying to cheese people with Snow Cloak plus Substitute plus Thunder Wave strategies on Hail teams. But then you notice it has one of the most valuable moves in Pokemon, Spikes. Furthermore, it's partially a Ghost type, which means it blocks Rapid Spin while setting up an entry hazard. No other Ghost type in Gen 4 does this. Thus, it has a niche in overuse as a frail spiking lead that's meant to throw him up and let its offensive-minded teammates take the reins. And since it also has Taunt, it can prevent Stealth Rock from slower Pokemon, which is most of them really. Heatran, Swampert, Hippowdon, Gliscor, Bronzong, and common variations of Jirachi come to mind. Azelf and Aerodactyl are faster, but that's what Icy Wind is for. Now, there are also several Pokemon that use priority to finish Froslass off with only a layer of spikes and a 5-6 disadvantage, such as Machamp, Metagross, and Empoleon, but using Destiny Bond on the first turn will thwart this and make the game 5-5, which is more valuable than a layer of spikes against the kinds of offensive teams that tend to lead off with these Pokemon, all things considered. They also tend to hope they remove a more generally valuable Pokemon than Froslass, and possibly even more than one Pokemon, so it ends up working out in the Froslass user's favor anyway. That is, unless they switch and concede an unblockable layer of spikes, in which case the threat is neutralized. Of course, attacking on the Destiny Bond and going for Stealth Rock on the second turn to kill the bond with Metagross or Empoleon before trying to finish Froslass off is a very real possibility. But there are a few things to consider. One, Stealth Rock on these Pokemon significantly dropped in usage because against fellow offensive leads, they often must make the choice between getting Stealth Rock and being down 5-6 or taking a 6-5 with the lead almost dead and therefore nearly guaranteeing they won't get Stealth Rock up. However, these variants of these Pokemon do still exist and must be taken into account. In those cases, Froslass will get a spike as they get Stealth Rock, so at least some sort of longer pressure has been exerted alongside the opponent, and the Froslass user's team should have a Pokemon that can deal with these dangerous opponents afterwards. By this rationale, one can simply stack spikes from the start, punishing a possible Stealth Rock with multiple layers, and if they merely kill Froslass, then they don't have Stealth Rock when the next Pokemon that accounts for these less advantageous matchups switches in. And it's really up to the player how they want to structure their team and play the game. Froslass also matches up quite well against the common, powerful Zapdos, Flygon, Roserade, and Dragonite leads. Now, ideally, it gets as many spikes as possible, while denying the opponent hazards of their own, in a perfect world. It manages to get a Destiny Bond off as well, although most well-built teams that are also played well won't allow this to happen. Then its teammates who are usually specially selected to abuse spikes, for example Infernape, Mixed Dragonite, and Dragon Dance Tyranitar, have a great advantage they can try to press. The team must be crafted to defeat Rapid Spinners, mainly Starmie, so Froslass's work isn't for nothing, and this must be considered when choosing the Stealth Rocker, as well as the second spin blocker, and even tertiary methods of dealing with it, such as Jolteon, a different Choice Scarfer, Dugtrio, or even maneuvering games in such a way that setup threats get in and get set up before Starmie gets a chance. For example, it will crumple to Agility Metagross's Life Orb Thunder Punch if Metagross gets a chance to set up beforehand, which isn't exactly hard to facilitate. It requires great care both team and play-wise, but Froslass provides an extremely unique niche that is rewarding to the player who knows what they're doing. Of course, this is a small niche, all things considered, although not one to be undervalued. Regardless, Froslass not being a top metagame force meant it dropped to underused, where it was absolutely incredible. The lower overall power level, as well as not dealing with Tyranitar and Steel types everywhere, meant Froslass was a tremendous Pokemon. Of course, its lead set was the go-to, and with that, it was utterly dominant, shutting down just about every other lead, meaning it prevented their hazards and laid up spikes at minimum. God forbid it managed to nail nail something with a Destiny Bond as well, because that's just too vicious a way to start off a battle. Some people even use Scarf Venusaur with Sleep Powder as the only way to truly stop Froslass. However, the less brutal environment allowed some other tricks it had to shine. With Trick and Choice Scarf, it lured and incapacitated Registeel completely, and Registeel is a huge roadblock to common Pokemon in underuse, so this is a big deal. The most prominent non-sash lead set though was bulky Froslass. That's right, Froslass of all things could run a bulky set, and it ran it well. This allowed it to repeatedly switch into the attacks of the rapid spinning Blastoise and Donphan that were quite common in the tier and heal up with Pain Split, a vicious tactic that would keep it healthy to defend against them, while weakening them and making them less able to spin. Eventually, it was deemed way too effective in littering its environments with spikes and harassing everything in its path, and was banned to borderline, leaving players scrambling to figure out how they were going to replicate its quick or bulky spiking prowess. And it turns out the answer was Quillfish. Lastly, Froslass was even quite good in the tier above Overuse. The lead metagame in Ubers is very important from the very beginning. Deoxys speed shaped it completely, with its gold standard trademark Stealth Rock plus Spikes plus Taunt set, alongside its unmatched speed. Hazards in general are very powerful in Ubers because of how helpful they are in checking the dangerous beasts that roam the tier, and spinning generally won't happen because the spinning options are not only rare, but they struggle with the incredible Giratina origin form, which is absolutely amazing on Spike's teams, so it's a great fit that organically goes completely against the tide of the player trying to spin. The Deoxys set ideally sets the pace completely for the beginning of the match. Thus, it is very important to beat Deoxys, whether it's by stopping its setup with Choice Scarf Darkrai, outspeeding and sleeping it with Dark Void, or by limiting it to just Stealth Rock with a strong attack and a follow-up priority move as seen by Pokemon like Deoxys Attack, Rayquaza, Quillfish, or Scizor, or even by pressuring it with Fortress's rapid spin threats from the very beginning. Some players even use Tyranitar to bring it down to the Focus Sash and have Sandstorm finish it off. But despite all that, Froslass takes a different approach. As you can see from the aforementioned examples, spikes are very important, and taunting your opponent's hazards is also very useful. Froslass even gets the spike without concern against Fortress. So how does it handle Deoxys? Well, it's simple. Icy Wind and Shadow Ball. First, it lowers its speed, and then either feints or threatens to feint the Deoxys with the follow-up Shadow Ball. Thus, either Deoxys gets no hazards while taunting Froslass, or gets one and then Froslass is free to spike itself. And therein lies Froslass's excellent role in Gen 4 Ubers. And honestly, it's not a gimmick, it's legitimately really good. Now on to Black and White. With Team Preview, dedicated leads such as Froslass took a severe hit. Ferrothorn providing uncontestedly reliable spikes didn't help matters, and thus Froslass wasn't used much except for a brief stint in Black and White 2, where it appeared on a few hyper offense teams. Its new ability Cursed Body also provided some depth to its game, as a Pokemon knocking it out could have its move stuff, and that could provide a setup opportunity for one of Frostlass's teammates, especially if the Pokemon that knocked it out was choiced. While it couldn't exactly rely on Focus Sash and Sand, outside of it, it had 2 chances to have it activate, with a pretty meaty 51% chance. However, the teams with it, as with most other post-Deoxys frail hyper offense teams, such as those of Custat Berry Skarmory, were inconsistent, and there was way too much strength flying around Black and White 2 with not enough team slots, so it became increasingly difficult to justify having 2 Pokemon for hazard duties when you could just run them both on one Pokemon, or just run Stealth Rock and begin blasting afterwards with the numerous nuclear options that were available. And thus Froslass ended up in underuse, although not for long, as it was the same story as the previous generation, just with different abusers, and also being able to fit in beautifully on Hail teams, who now had their weather uncontested. As a result, it was banned to borderline fairly early in the generation. Lastly, Froslass retained its old niche in Ubers, although this time with Cursed Body, which is of course a vast improvement on the largely useless Snow Cloak. Losing to Darkrai is even worse in this generation because of the brutal sweep mechanics, but when paired with popular effective Pokemon like Sleep Talk Palkia or specially defensive Rest Talk Kyogre, especially when there's also the amazing Choice Scarf Genesect for backup, it's not so bad, especially as all 3 of these Pokemon are phenomenal spike abusers. And as for VGC, Froslass actually did have a niche in 2012 and 2013, and there are accounts of various top cutters facing them in the early rounds, but unfortunately we couldn't find any notable placements. But we can at least tell you what it did. What it did was fit on Hail teams with its infuriating Snow Cloak ability and use its great speed to outrun and smash common Pokemon like Garchomp and Zapdos with Blizzard, using Focus Sash to take hits or Ice Gem to leave a sizable sting despite its meager special attack. However, as could be surmised from its lack of placements, there were probably better Hail abusers, and it probably just wasn't that good. But the niche did exist. with the emphasis on stronger and stronger threats, thus needing team slots and not being able to afford a defensively useless Pokemon solely for spikes, especially with the introduction of the fog and the lack of rapid spin, Froslass disappeared from overuse completely. In underuse, however, the metagame was more comfortable for it, and it combined spin blocking ability, since spinning still existed in underuse, with a fast taunt stopping defog. This allowed it to function as the ultimate anti-hazard removal Pokemon. However, it was no longer able to pull off a bulky set with these more powerful surroundings, not just because of the average power level strength-wise, but also with knockoff being spammed everywhere. But it was a fine lead, albeit requiring its team to be built quite carefully. This meant it was still specialized enough to not warrant consistently high usage, and thus it dropped to rarely used. Although it didn't last there, pulling all its tricks from underuse and generations prior, and it now sits in rarely used borderline, with a fine roll in underuse. And as for Ubers, unfortunately the Fog Arceus meant it totally lost its niche. So, such is life. Now on to Sun and Moon. Despite the nerfed burn damage, it was still exciting to learn that Froslass got access to Will-O-Wisp. Not only did it have the cool factor of an ice type using a fire move, it was actually effective. Its weakness to common physical attacks was now somewhat augmented, and it could spread even more residual damage on various Pokemon, including those that threatened its precious spikes. Now, it wasn't quite Kyurem White's Fusion Flare, and it wouldn't exactly wow players everywhere, but it was still notable. Overuse was a pipe dream by this point, and even though it had little overall usage sufficient to drop it all the way down to PU, thanks to its specialized nature, it does have a niche with its classic set. But now with Will-O-Wisp, in all of underused, rarely used, and never used, as well as of course, PU. All that changes really are the Pokemon surrounding it, both on its team and the opponents. But despite some smaller metagame or team-specific tricks to be found in its move pool or teammates, the overall idea behind its playstyle is the same. Examples include Thunder Wave to hit Pokemon such as Incineroar and Enyu, Hex for status Pokemon, Colbur Berry to take knockoff and dark moves in general without reliance on Focus Sash, or Thunderbolt for Mantine in rarely used. And as for VGC, in 2018, we actually did find one notable placement from Froslass, and I apologize if I butcher your name right now, but Kellen was a senior division semifinalist at the 2018 Memphis Regionals, using a unique Froslass for this VGC metagame. He didn't use it in Hail, but instead he utilized Fake Tears to help his special attackers more easily score KOs on their opponents. He also packed Icy Wind to help slow the team down, while also running Ice Beam for a stronger stab attack. And with Shadow Ball as a secondary stab, this set is useful against all of the Tapus in one way or another. Regardless, this is a minuscule niche, and the fact that this is the only notable placement we could find speaks to Froslass's overall mediocrity in the metagame. But props to Quentin for making it that far with Froslass. And that's it. So how good was Froslass actually? It was the definition of a specialized Pokemon, unique in its role throughout the generations. Sometimes it had variations in how it performed that role, but the fact is you will never ever see a Froslass without spikes. Ever. At least in singles. They are integral to its existence in every tier, and Spike's lack of use in VGC is probably why Froslass didn't get by too well, since it doesn't have the utility that it does in singles to make up for its mediocre defensive typing and fragile bulk. However, overall, Froslass, while not being the best Pokemon ever, is the only thing to truly do what it does, and it's effective enough to have retained this role since it first showed up in the 4th generation. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you guys had a great December, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False White Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course, as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to all of you guys as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, yada yada yada. And that's all I got. See you next year, everyone.